Batman has been in video games for over 35 years. From 8-bit side-scrollers to billion-dollar open worlds, there have been masterpieces, disasters, and everything in between. So today, we're ranking every single Batman game ever made, starting with the one that kicked it all off, Batman 1986. In 1986, Batman got his first video game, and it was on the Amstrad CPC. Developed by Ocean Software, this was a 3D isometric action adventure where you wandered around the Batcave trying to rescue Robin. It wasn't a side-scroller or an arcade brawler. It was this oddly ambitious puzzle exploration game running on hardware that could barely handle it. And honestly, for what it was, it worked. The controls were clunky, the visuals were rough, and navigating those isometric rooms felt like solving a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. But it had genuine ambition. It proved Batman could function as a video game character, not just a comic book icon. But if you thought Batman's first outing was rough around the edges, wait until you see what came next. Batman, Return of the Joker. Every franchise has a middle child nobody remembers. For early Batman games, this is it. Sunsoft dropped Return of the Joker in December 1991, and the timing could not have been worse. The SNES and Genesis were already stealing the spotlight, and here's this NES game showing up to a party everyone had already left, which is a shame because it's actually solid. 7 stages, a multi-phase Joker battle, and difficulty that makes the 1989 game look forgiving. But nobody was buying NES cartridges in late 1991. Here's the irony though, because so few copies sold, Return of the Joker is now one of the more sought-after NES cartridges out there. The game nobody wanted became the game collectors quietly hunt for. Obscurity is apparently the best business model, but at least Return of the Joker got to exist. The next Batman game had to compete with something far more dangerous than bad timing. Batman Returns. Here's something nobody talks about with this game. Konami built it as a beat-em-up with genuinely impressive production values for 1993. The gothic level design, the heavy combat, the way enemies stagger and recoil, all of it felt like Konami actually cared about making a real game instead of just slapping a movie logo on a cartridge, which honestly is peak Konami doing what Konami did best in the early 90s. 7 stages of beating the absolute life out of Penguin's circus gang, and the tight combat design made every hit feel heavier than it had any right to. It reviewed well and moved solid numbers for a movie tie-in that could have easily been forgettable shovelware. To this day, there's an ongoing debate over which version is definitive, since Konami only handled the SNES version, while Sega's was a completely different game by a different developer. I don't know what to tell you. People take their 16-bit Batman very seriously, but if you thought Konami was done with Batman after this, you'd be wrong. Adventures of Batman and Robin. Here's something beautiful about the 90s. You could walk into a store, buy a game called The Adventures of Batman and Robin for your SNES, and your friend could buy the exact same game for his Genesis, and you'd be playing 2 completely different products. Same title, totally different games. The SNES version was developed by Konami, played like a polished side-scrolling action game, and felt like a proper extension of the animated series. The Genesis version was developed by Clockwork Tortoise, had a completely different structure, and was infamous for its absurd difficulty. 2 different studios, 2 different visions, same name on the box. Nobody told the kids at the store. This was the console war in its purest form. Not marketing, not specs, just one group of kids getting a completely different Batman than the other, and neither side realizing it until they compared notes at school. But if you think platform loyalty drama was bad in the mid-90s, wait until you see what happened when Batman went to the movies again. Batman Forever. This is the game that proves you can't polish a turd, but you can absolutely hand paint one frame by frame. Acclaim dropped serious money on digitized motion capture graphics, giving Batman Forever a visual style that genuinely looked impressive for 1995. Every character was built from real actors' movements, flashy stuff. Then you actually played it. The game was rushed out to match Joel Schumacher's film, and it shows. Controls feel like you're piloting Batman through wet cement. The combat is stiff, the level design is confusing, and the whole thing reeks of a product that existed because a movie existed, not because anyone had a good idea for a game. It sold reasonably well off brand recognition alone, but reviews were brutal. Slick presentation, terrible everything else. This is where the Batman gaming franchise starts its downward spiral, and trust me, it gets so much worse from here. Batman and Robin. By 1997, Batman was essentially a curse word in entertainment. The Schumacher films had torched every ounce of goodwill the franchise had, and Acclaim looked at that smoldering wreckage and said, yeah, let's make a game out of that. Batman and Robin on PlayStation was technically the first Batman game with full 3D polygonal graphics, 3 playable characters, an open Gotham to explore. On paper, it sounds like a leap forward. In practice, it was like watching someone trip up a staircase for 6 hours straight. The camera fought you harder than any villain. The controls handled like you were steering a shopping cart through wet concrete. Critics handed it scores averaging around 3.5 out of 10, which honestly honestly feels generous. This wasn't just a bad game. This was the final nail in a coffin that was already 6 feet underground. The Batman brand was radioactive. Films dead. Games dead. Everything associated with that bat symbol was commercial poison. But somehow, against all odds, Batman would crawl out of that grave. It just took a while. Batman: Vengeance. By 2001, Batman gaming was clinically dead. No films in production, no cultural momentum, and the last few games had the collective reputation of a dumpster fire behind an Arby's. Nobody was asking for another Batman game. The franchise had earned exactly 0 goodwill. So what did Ubisoft do? They ignored all of it. Every failed movie tie-in, every rushed cash grab, every reason the brand was toxic. They went back to the animated series, the one version of Batman that never stopped being good, and built a game around that instead. Batman: Vengeance launched across PS2, GameCube, Xbox, and PC with a full story campaign and 0 interest in pretending Joel Schumacher's films ever happened. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't revolutionary, it was just solid, faithful, and fun, which, after years of garbage, felt like a miracle. And quietly, without anyone really noticing at the time, it proved Batman games could actually be worth playing again. But the real resurrection was still a few years away. Batman: Rise of Sin Tzu. Usually video games adapt comic book villains. This one invented one. Sin Tzu was created specifically for this game, a brand new antagonist who never existed in any DC comic, cartoon, or film before October 2003. And then DC looked at this beat 'em up and said, yeah, he's canon now. That almost never happens. The adaptation pipeline flows one direction from comics to everything else, and this random PS2 brawler reversed it entirely. The game itself was a standard beat 'em up with 4 playable characters: Batman, Robin, Nightwing, and Batgirl. It pulled review scores in the 5.0 to 6.5 range, perfectly mediocre. But the fact that a mid-tier licensed game accidentally contributed a villain to one of the largest comic book universes in history, that's genuinely wild. Most games based on comics are lucky if anyone remembers them. This one left a mark on DC canon. And speaking of games riding the coattails of a much bigger franchise, the next entry had Christopher Nolan's entire cinematic vision backing it up. Batman Begins. For years, Batman games carried the stench of Joel Schumacher's rubber nipples. Every tie-in felt like an apology nobody asked for. But in 2005, something changed. Christopher Nolan's vision of Batman hit consoles alongside the theatrical release. And for the first time in nearly a decade, a Batman game didn't feel embarrassing. Eurocom developed this one across PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and PC, and they actually tried. Christian Bale didn't voice Batman, but the game pulled in other film cast members like Liam Neeson, Katie Holmes, Cillian Murphy, and Michael Caine, who all lent their voices to their respective characters. That alone separated it from every lazy cash grab that came before, and players noticed. Review scores landed in the decent range, which doesn't sound earth-shattering until you remember what Batman games had been averaging. This was a step in the right direction, a sign that the franchise could claw its way back to respectability. Turns out, when you give developers serious source material instead of Neon Circus nonsense, they make a more serious game. Who knew? But if Batman Begins rebuilt the foundation, the next entry was about to blow the entire roof off. LEGO Batman, the video game. In 2008, Batman was at peak darkness. The Dark Knight had just become the biggest movie of the year. Everyone wanted gritty, serious, realistic Batman. So naturally, Traveler's Tales said, what if we made him a tiny plastic man who falls apart when he gets hit, and proceeded to outsell basically everything. LEGO Batman, the video game, moved over 12 million copies. That made it the best-selling Batman game at the time. Not Arkham, not any brooding detective simulator. A slapstick comedy where Batman's cape is injection-molded plastic. The game shipped with over 30 playable DC characters, unique suit abilities, and 30 story levels split across hero and villain campaigns. It hit every platform imaginable, which means literally everyone could play it. Here's the thing nobody wanted to admit. Funny Batman outsold serious Batman. While Nolan was winning awards, a little plastic man with no dialogue was winning wallets, which is, a humbling realization for anyone who thought Batman needed to be taken seriously to succeed. But if LEGO proved Batman could be funny, the next game proved he could be something nobody expected at all. Batman, the brave and the bold. Here's something you almost never see in licensed gaming. A kid's game that actually respects kids. WayForward Technologies picked up the Cartoon Network animated series in November 2010 and turned it into a side-scrolling action game for the Wii and Nintendo DS. 4 episodes worth of story missions, team-up mechanics with different DC heroes, and Wii motion controls that were genuinely fun to use. Not waggle the remote and hope are the best fun. Actually responsive, actually satisfying fun. The easy move would have been to dumb everything down, make it impossible to lose, and call it a day. WayForward didn't do that. They made a game that was age-appropriate without being condescending, which is a design philosophy so rare in kids' games it might as well be extinct. It averaged around 7.0 to 7.5 across reviews, not earth-shattering. But every kid who played it 8-bit got a Batman game that treated them like an actual person with functioning thumbs. But if a kid's game treating children with dignity sounds wholesome, the next entry is about to drag us in the complete opposite direction. Arkham Asylum. This is the one. This is the game that changed everything. Not just for Batman, not just for superhero games, for combat design across the entire video game industry. In August 2009, Rocksteady Studios released Batman Arkham Asylum for PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, and nothing was ever the same. The story was written by Paul Dini, the legendary Batman writer responsible for some of the best episodes of the animated series. Mark Hamill voiced the Joker with a performance so unhinged and so perfect that it still gives people chills over 15 years later. The writing alone would have made this game special, but then there was the combat. Rocksteady built what they called free flow combat, a rhythm-based system that let you chain strikes, counters, and cape stuns together seamlessly, and it made hand-to-hand fighting feel like poetry. Every punch connected, every counter flowed into the next attack. It was deeply satisfying and visually spectacular in a way nobody had ever seen before. And every major action game released after 2009 borrowed from it, every single one. The game sold over 4 million copies and launched a franchise that would define Batman gaming for the next decade. But if Arkham Asylum built the foundation, the next game turned it into a skyscraper. Arkham City. Everyone said it would fail. You take the tight, claustrophobic brilliance of Arkham Asylum and blow it wide open into a sandbox 5 times larger. That's how you kill a franchise. Except Rocksteady didn't just make it work. They made the single best superhero game anyone had ever played. Arkham City launched in October 2011 across PS3, Xbox 360, PC, and eventually Wii U, and it sold over 12 million copies. That made it the most commercially successful superhero game ever made at that time. The combat system deepened, the gadget variety expanded, and you could play as Catwoman, Robin, and Nightwing alongside Batman through DLC and challenge maps. Every corner of that open world had something worth finding. Every rooftop had a reason to exist. But here's what elevates this game from great to legendary. Mark Hamill came back as the Joker, delivering what he initially said would be his final performance in the role. And you can hear it. Every line carries this weight, this finality, like he knew it was goodbye. The ending still has people sitting in silence at their screens over a decade later. The Asylum versus City debate will never die, and honestly, both sides are right. But if you think Rocksteady's peak was untouchable, wait until you see what happened when someone else tried to fill their shoes. Lego Batman 2. While the entire gaming industry was busy debating whether Arkham City was the greatest superhero game ever made, a Lego game quietly walked in and outsold it. Over 11 million copies. Nobody was paying attention because it didn't have a gritty atmosphere or a complex combat system. It had plastic minifigures. Here's the thing, Traveler's Tales didn't just make a sequel, they blew the doors off. The roster jumped to over 70 DC characters, Superman and Wonder Woman included. Co-op expanded to 2 players with dynamic split screen, and they added an entire open world Gotham to explore. It was basically a DC Universe sandbox disguised as a children's game, and commercially it destroyed. The biggest Batman game of 2012 wasn't the one winning Game of the Year awards, it was the one your 9-year-old nephew was playing on Christmas morning, which is, you know, kind of humbling for the entire AAA industry. But if you think Lego was done embarrassing serious developers, wait until Batman's next big budget outing tries to recapture the Arkham magic without Rocksteady at the wheel. Arkham Origins. Here's the thing about Arkham Origins, it's not a bad game. It's a perfectly fine game, and that was the entire problem. WB Games Montreal took over development after Rocksteady stepped away, and they delivered exactly what you'd expect from a competent studio handed the keys to someone else's masterpiece. The combat worked. The new crime scene investigation mechanics were genuinely cool. The Joker reveal twisting what initially seemed like a Black Mask story on Christmas Eve gave the whole thing a distinct atmosphere. On paper, nothing is wrong here, but noticeably weaker. Sales, compared to Arkham City's blockbuster numbers, tell you everything you need to know. Players didn't want to go backward. They wanted to see what came next, not what came before. A prequel answering questions nobody was asking. Review scores landed around 7.0 to 7.5, which is the polite critical equivalent of yeah, it's fine. And fine is a death sentence when you're following up one of the greatest superhero games ever made. The lesson was brutal but clear. Audiences want progression, not regression. A lesson the industry actually learned, which is honestly kind of miraculous. But if Origins taught developers that prequels don't sell, the next Arkham game would teach them something far more painful about ambition. Arkham Knight. Rocksteady's grand finale had everything going for it. A next-gen Gotham twice the size of Arkham City, the entire Rogues Gallery, and the single most requested feature in Batman gaming history, a drivable Batmobile. And honestly, the Batmobile is exactly where the problems start. The Batmobile is incredible for about 45 minutes, tearing through streets, launching off ramps, feeling like an absolute force force of nature. Then the game asks you to do tank battles, and then more tank battles, and then boss fights that are also tank battles. By hour 10, you're piloting a military vehicle more than you're being Batman, which is, not ideal. But the real disaster was the PC port. Frame rates in single digits, textures refusing to load, the whole thing borderline unplayable at launch. Warner Brothers actually pulled the game from sale on Steam and offered full refunds. Console players got a gorgeous experience, PC players got a war crime. Then there's the Arkham Knight's identity twist, guessed by basically every fan months before release, and a final conclusion that split the community so hard people are still arguing about it. Millions of copies sold, genuinely great combat underneath, and yet the conversation always circles back to tanks and that twist. But if you think a divisive ending is rough, wait until you see what happened when Batman stepped out of the action genre entirely. Batman without punching. Here's a sentence nobody expected to work. We're making a Batman game where you mostly just talk to people. That's essentially what Telltale pitched in 2016, and somehow it actually worked. Batman. The Telltale series dropped as a 5-episode narrative adventure that did something no major Batman game had seriously attempted. It made Bruce Wayne the main character, not Batman. Bruce, the guy navigating Gotham's political corruption, making impossible moral choices, and figuring out who to trust when literally everyone is lying to him. The wild part, it sold well enough that Telltale greenlit a full sequel, The Enemy Within, just a year later, for a game where the most intense action is choosing whether to shake someone's hand or threaten them. Now, did your choices actually matter? Players who ran through it twice discovered most branches funneled back to the same outcomes regardless, which is, not ideal for a game whose selling point is your choices shape Gotham. But even knowing the illusion existed, people still felt something during those decisions. The writing carried the experience whether the branching was real or not. But if stripping Batman down to dialogue choices was experimental, wait until Rocksteady strapped a headset on your face and dropped you directly into his eyes. Batman. Arkham VR. Every Batman game up to this point asked you to press buttons to be Batman. Arkham VR asked you to actually be him. And the difference is bigger than you think. Released in October 2016 as a PlayStation VR launch title, Rocksteady stripped away everything people associated with their Arkham series. No free flow combat, no grappling across rooftops. Instead, they gave you a roughly 60 to 90 minute experience where you physically stand in the Batcave, pick up evidence with your actual hands, and rotate crime scenes in 360 degrees. Here's the thing, it worked. Players kept reporting that the detective sequences, the slow, methodical evidence collection felt more like being Batman than punching ever did. Strong reviews across the board, with critics praising the immersion and atmosphere. For what most people assumed would be a glorified tech demo, that's not bad. Turns out, the core fantasy of Batman was never about the fists. It was about the brain. Rocksteady figured that out in under 2 hours with a headset, but if a short VR experience could nail the Batman fantasy you'd think a full game without Batman entirely would be a disaster. You'd be right. Gotham Knights. After 8 years of waiting, fans finally got a new Batman game, except it wasn't a Batman game. Batman is dead. That's the premise. You play as Nightwing, Red Hood, Robin, and Batgirl across a co-op campaign set in a Gotham that's moved on without its Dark Knight. Here's the thing. Gotham Knights underperformed hard. Arkham City sold over 12 million copies. Gotham Knights couldn't even come close. That's not a decline. That's a collapse. And the reason is painfully simple. Nobody wanted a Batman game without Batman. WB Games Montreal built the entire experience around loot drops, gear scores, and co-op grinding in a franchise where people just wanted to punch criminals alone in a dark room. Players expected the next Arkham and got a looter brawler with an identity crisis. Reviews landed in the mixed range, which in gaming terms translates to it exists, I guess. The lesson should have been obvious. You can make a game about the Bat family. But if you slap Gotham on the box and remove the one character people actually showed up for, don't act surprised when your audience stays home. But if Gotham Knights proved that removing Batman kills a franchise, the next game proved something far more interesting about where Batman gaming goes from here. Batman Arkham Shadow. After 40 years of Batman games, the best reviewed one in nearly a decade is locked behind a headset most people don't own, which is, not ideal. Arkham Shadow launched in October 2024 as a MetaQuest 3 exclusive developed by Camouflage. It's a full-length, narrative-driven VR action game set in the Arkham universe, and it's genuinely excellent. Reviews averaged around 8.5 to 9 out of 10. The detective work feels natural. The combat feels physical. The atmosphere feels real in a way no flat-screen game can replicate. But here's the thing. The majority of Batman fans have zero idea this game exists. VR players are out here calling it the best Batman experience since Arkham Knight. Meanwhile, everyone else is still waiting for the next real Batman game without realizing it already came out. It's like throwing the best party of the year inside a submarine. Great time if you're invited, invisible if you're not, and that's where Batman gaming stands in 2024. The franchise that that started on home computers in everyone's living room now lives on a platform most people have never touched. 40 years of evolution, from 8-bit side-scrollers to open-world masterpieces to full virtual reality. And the biggest question facing Batman games isn't can they be great, it's will anyone be there to play them? If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.